Good morning, Travis.
Hi, Alok. How you doing?
Well, I just woke up and you know me well enough to know that in the mornings I'm very philosophical.
Yeah, when I heard that we were doing this across time differences, I strapped myself in, ready for a conversation because I know 7 a.m. A lot of people think that when you just wake up, you're going to have short answers, blunt. But I know from being on tour with you that 7 a.m. is when you're at your most deep and reflective. So, buckling up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I was really looking forward to having this conversation with you because we have both now been forcibly at home for over a year, which is new for us as touring artists, where we were constantly living out of our suitcase, constantly on the go, in new venues, new countries. And I think for the first time in a long time in our careers, we've had to like sit down in one place. How has this been for you?
Well, my home has been interesting because I've relocated because I needed to find a feeling of home. So I'm someone that during the pandemic left where they were living previously and would have called home in search of, I guess, the comforts of an actual hometown. And so I went back to my hometown, and it's been really difficult because you realize that when you sit with yourself and don't have the distractions of travel, of touring, of things that you can't avoid come up, and things that you have been avoiding or trying to run from come to the present. So it's been difficult, but I've learned how important it is to spend as much time as I would on my outward art and my performance and my content and all of these things. That amount of time is just as important to spend on cultivating a sense of home or safety where you are. How has it been for you?
I feel like each month it's like a new episode. Like in the beginning, there's this like hope of like, yeah, I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna accomplish the Shakespearean masterpiece. Like I have time. And then a year plus in, I'm like, about that. Yeah, I think now it's more like I'm gonna get through the day. So the pace has really shifted. But I think one of the biggest shifts for me is the question of audience. I think that in my work, um, I became so dependent on audience reaction. As a live performer, one of the blessings and the curses is you can tell how your work is landing immediately. Like if a joke hits or not, or if you can make people cry or not. And now when I'm making art, there's just no audience. And if there is, it's a virtual audience, which is even more surreal because you have no idea if anything's landing. And so I've had to become my own audience in a way that I never was before. And turns out I'm the harshest critic. And turns out it has required, I think, me to do some introspective work about what I'm doing and who I am that I wouldn't have done before. And I've been thinking a lot about the scenario of being alone and writing as actually one of like performing for yourself. I used to think it was like just a solitary thing, but now I think I'm realizing like you're really staging something for yourself and then looking at it, and that intimacy is really hard. I know you've been working on a book project. What has that felt like for you?
I mean, so much that when you just said the performance for yourself, I was like, read me to fill, be done, because it's even interesting the process. I was just finishing a chapter before coming on here, and I changed. And I was like, what? Why am I changing? I put some makeup on, I took out the outfit, I changed my colors. I've been in grey pajamas writing for the past like 2 days. And I was like, why am I changing for this thing? What is it? And I was like, oh, it's the change of audience when you're with yourself and you're writing. I don't feel I need to do any signifiers to tell myself who I feel like because
Hmm.
myself. But then as soon as there was you or the sound person or the potential audience of this, I'm like, let me quickly put up my signifiers that let people know this is who I am. And so I think the process of writing at home, especially in this time, I've actually found, deeply, deeply challenging and deeply, like, as always in a writing project, I'm filled with a lot of doubt and all these things. But the end product that isn't around yet, but when it gets there, I have this strange sense of like already feeling how important it will feel to look at something that existed in a time where everything else was different, and to look at
Mm.
what writing looks like where everything else is shifting. Um, Normally, when I write, I can't remember if I look back at a paragraph or a chapter. I can't remember where I was when I'd written it because life was so in flux. Whereas what I'm finding when I go through editing at the moment is that I can be like, that was the day where I went to the shop and this shop because nothing actually happens in my life at the moment. And so it's interesting. It's difficult, but it made me wonder. The question I wanted to ask coming to this discussion is so often, I think, when we're artists like us have walked to conversations, we're often asked from the negative standpoint, like where can't we find home? Where do we have displacement? Where are we in danger? Where are we in flux? And I guess I wanted to ask you, if I was going to start the convo in a different place, is where do you think you find home, or where have you found home?
You know, I'm a big nerd and I read all the time. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I made a goal to read all of Susan Sontag's essays. And Susan Sontag basically says that she belongs to the nation of literature. And that concept was really exciting to me because for the first time I realized that as a writer, I've always had a very ambivalent relationship to geography. I write out of hotels and trains. I write out of airports and back seats. I've never really had like a study that is like my place. I've always been a kind of mobile writer in that way. But when I'm writing, I make home around me wherever I am. And it so kind of becomes like camping or like having all the equipment in my backpack that I can sort of build a little ecosystem no matter where I am and feel connected. I recently had a conversation with one of my favorite novelists, Ocean Vuong, and he said that writing was like his meditative practice. And I started to realize, like, yeah, meditation doesn't have to look like stillness and quiet. It can sometimes just look like the thing that allows you to unfurl yourself and process. And so, home for me is less a destination or an origin, less like geography or even temporality, and more sensation that I've learned to conjure wherever. And I don't know on the other side if that's a marker of my like ability to adapt and thrive, or if it's a marker of like loss. Is it that I'm so easy at making home because home was always a vexed place? Like, would I have this kind of sense of innovation and resourcefulness if I had been eligible or accepted into like a sort of like structured home? Because I think a lot of my ability to do this work comes because the physical world wasn't safe. So the realm of my imagination was where I had to make safety. So I learned how to kind of check out from what was around me and build something else concurrently or alongside it. So, I mean, being non binary, spoiler alert, I think it's both. Both like a marker of sadness that I was never able to feel like I belonged, but then also triumph that I found belonging alongside that. How about you?
Just catching up. As always, after your 7 a.m. philosophical lectures, you go straight to asking, and I'm still hanging over what you said previously. Um, I think it's such a testament again to like how these things are often born out of struggle, but show our resourcefulness to change into something else. My answer feels less. Although I think when you were speaking about it, I was like, actually, you know what? I do find a lot of home in the process of making work. But I think, I mean, maybe this is similar to many homes. It doesn't feel stable enough for me yet, my practice, to reside as feeling like home. Because, I mean, you know, from conversations we've had, not being recorded, that, I'm often like doubt is something that really shrouds a
Hmm.
lot of the process, and feeling like an imposter and not feeling good enough, and all of these things really come up a lot in my when I'm making work. And still, despite making work now for 5 years, it still comes up as if it's my first year making work. And so it doesn't feel like a stable enough place for me to go, yeah, it feels like home in that way. Because for me, home, and this has been really shown by like coming back to my hometown, is that I was like, what makes my hometown feel like home as opposed to the place I was previously living for 7 years that I would have called my home? And I was like, huh, when I'm walking down the street here, if something went wrong, I would know how to get back to safety instantly without looking at my phone and just trusting myself. Whether that be going to a place I live, or whether that be knowing enough people or knowing enough spaces or places that I will feel safe. And so I realized that for me, a lot of home is about safety and protection. And why this feels like my hometown is that drop me in any place in the city, and I'll either feel safe or will know how to get to safety on my own accord instantly, or find people that make me feel safe in abundance. And so I was having that experience the other day. I was walking, actually, just on Friday. I was walking to my mum's house here, and it was the first time I'd kind of done the walk in a while, because obviously we're inside most of the time at the moment. And I was in an outlandish outfit, even by my standards. You know, I'm talking really um, garish in all the right and wrong ways. And, you know, these group of people started laughing at me as, you know, Cal surprise. And I paused and I thought about what to do. And I paused and I was like, am I going to carry on walking? Am I going to lower my head? You know, often the decision making we have, and it sounds longer than it is, but you've got 30 seconds to kind of do it. And I decided to go up to them and ask them, you know, why are you laughing at me? And I went up
Hmm.
to them and I said, excuse me, are you laughing at me? And they, you know, they all stuttered and blubbered. And I said, just to let you know, if you, I don't have time for the answer, but if you are laughing at me, you probably shouldn't. Like, there's nothing to laugh at, and you should carry on with your day. And I carried on walking. And then you kind of process the thing like a minute afterwards that you did it. And I was like, wait, that was wild. That was dangerous. And I was like, actually, it wasn't. I didn't feel dangerous. I didn't feel wild, because I knew that if something happened, there was the bakery across the road that I'd gone to since I was a little kid. Or I knew round the corner there was my friend. Or I knew just behind me was another house. And I knew that my home was here and my mum's house was there. And I was like, oh, that's what it feels like to be home. So I think, yeah, that was a long way to go about saying that I think home for me is about safety and a place where I feel like I can find it.
I think in that also home is a relation. Like it's about having connections with people and places so that you don't have to feel alone. I resonate with that because the pandemic, like I said, has been many chapters in my life, and one of them brought me back to my hometown, which was very curious because I hadn't spent much time there since I left. And I find myself like missing it and nostalgic now that I'm not there, because there was this kind of sense of familiarity, um, of like, oh, I know this road, and oh, I know this left turn, and oh, I don't need to turn on my GPS, and oh, I'm at the dentist's office, and the photo on the wall is someone I went to high school with. But then at the same time, there's also a sense of foreignness because, oh, all these people know me, but they don't know me. They don't have access to the language to decipher me. I'm not intelligible. It's like when I say I'm an artist there, people are like, what does that mean? Like that's not a thing, you know? And so it took me living in places like New York to be able to say I'm a writer and have people understood what that meant, or to give it any weight. And so I guess there's this sense that I've never been able to feel one place in the world where I'm totally aligned. Like it feels like I have to be compartmentalized everywhere. So while I might have access to like familiarity, I'm foreign. While I might be foreign, I'm familiar. And so that's why I think for me, home is more like a candle, and it sort of wavers and waxes and wanes, and I feel it in conversations and in interactions and in performances. I mean, you know it. The touring life is so strange because, in the one sense, you don't know any of these people that you're assembling when you're in some random place, but you feel like you know them really well. And some of my greatest friendships, even you, have come from that kind of intimacy of being in a new place and not knowing anyone and having to make home there. And I think that's what I miss the most about touring during pandemic, is the sort of ways in which the spontaneous and makeshift arrangements that often end up feeling more real than reality itself. I wanted to ask, prior to pandemic, through pandemic, you do a lot of more formal work in the theater space with venues. And I think it's really interesting because set design becomes a metaphor for like everything, setting a scene. What does it mean for you to sort of like be at a theater for like 2 to 3 months versus one night? What kind of different intimacy is there whenever you're staging the same show over and over again in the night?
Ah, you asked such a fun question, Alok. Um, oh my god. Well, the difference is that obviously, one, you are way more compatible with the touring life, getting up and going than I am. We know that from our touring experience together. So I really bed in to when I'm somewhere for 1 month or 2 months. I love it. I become obsessed with it because I have this chance to make this city, like, I guess, a home. And okay, I'll go to the joyful. I'll end on the joyful stuff. I guess the first thing is like as an artist that's trans whilst traveling to these theatres, especially in the UK, is that before they can even book us, there's prerequisites they have to do to make the place feel more like home to me. So if they want to book our show, they can't have gender. They have to have gender neutral toilets in the space. There's a so that's a structural change to make myself feel. Not that a gender neutral toilet makes me feel at home, but it doesn't make me it helps to making me feel comfortable. And so that was like a big major step when I started working in theatres that I guess I couldn't always control when we were working in more like ad hoc clubs or like underground spaces because they didn't always have the resources to structurally change something. But I would say that those spaces tended to already normally have gender neutral toilets anyway, um, because the underground was way ahead of the like theatres of a capital T. So yeah, I would get them to structurally change the spaces. I also find, like, I mean, now I'm just gonna say it, it's bougie as hell, but I find a local spa nearby, and I make sure that the theatre also contributes or somehow in the fund gets me the month-long membership. So in Edinburgh, the spa was across the road. I don't even care. And you know what? I thought I was going to be the bougie one out. I walked across and I saw every single black artist in Edinburgh that month in the spa with me too that day too. And so we'd all invested in that. And it really said something. I remember there was this moment where like it was week 3 of like Edinburgh Fringe. And that's like the week where everybody kind of becomes really tired and angry and all these things. And, it's week 3 of being in a city that, like, probably has about 7 black people. And you're there and you're tired. And I was like, you know what? I need to go to the spa across the road. And I go, and every single other artist is there on that day. And we've all put our hands up and say, we're not talking about the show today. Let's talk about everything else. And so those kind of comforts. I, of course, love a chip shop, so I find the nearest chip shop that can give me let me be culturally sensitive, like fries. So I would go and find that as well. I bring stuff from my bedroom with me as well. I bring notes, I bring pictures, all these kind of things. And it does make you realize that home is like those memories rather than like the building or the structure that you're leaving, because within a couple of days, I start to feel a sense of routine and home. And it makes me realize that for me, home is like maybe routine. And that's why I find touring life, when it's like day to day stuff, a bit more challenging, because it's like that break of routine. But it does make me think about how when we would tour together in Europe, you'd make sure, I learned from you that if you're going to go and do a show and you have time to go and have lunch with the people that brought you there, or to go and have lunch with like local queers in the organizing group there, and to go and eat with them and to find where their favorite spot is. Um, Normally vegan, because that's the kind of communities that we were in, but I would adapt to that vegan lifestyle, and I learned that from you, which meant that in Edinburgh I did the same thing. I found like the local queers and said, where do you go to eat, and let's go there. um, and I have very fond memories of us doing that in Europe, and me at the time feeling grumpy because I was tired and like, I don't want to do this, and then thankful afterwards because it made it feel like it was home. So yeah, I don't know. I just blabbered on.
Grumpy during, thankful afterwards is such a Travis Alabanza mood.
Yeah, always grumpy during, and then like 4 weeks later, thank you so much for that amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I guess I wanted to move our conversation now to thinking about home in a more sort of political context.
Hold on, sorry, my cat. Sorry.
You're actually just staging our performance art piece right now, being at home
I'm,
talking about home, so thank you
I'm
for
sorry.
that.
It's, yep.
Um, so much of our experience as trans artists of color is one of being told that we don't belong. And so much of the imagination of what it even means to be trans is that we are somehow dissonant or foreign in space or in our own bodies. But it's funny because I think that increasingly people are learning about the vastness and enormity of anti-trans violence, but then they're not asking the next question, which is, why do trans and non-binary people continue to live this life despite it? Like, what is it that gravitates us and propels us to continue going in this reckless pursuit of authenticity in the face of so much social judgment and isolation? It would be so much easier to comply with the mechanics and scripts and choreographies of the binary, but we don't. And I think my answer for why I don't, and for why so many of the people I don't do, is that for the first time in my life, I feel what many people have described or written about or imaged as home in this incarnation, meaning when I laugh, it's my laugh, or when I walk on the street, it's my foot touching the ground, or when I speak, it's my voice. I think that for the first part of my life, I found it difficult to be recorded or have any photos of me because the imposter syndrome was about being alive. And I was like, what? I felt like I was a script, living a script of someone else's character they had written. And then so much of what transition has been like for me is actually authoring my own script. And I'm curious if you feel the same way, if home is part of the reason that you are in this form that you're in now.
Well, I think that home is part of the reason why I'm pushing through in this form, and why I continue to like try and find the form. And I think that having felt safety and euphoria means that you then treat tell yourself that you're deserving of finding it again. And I think that the reason why we go through the adversities that we face to be visibly gender non-conforming is because we know that actually it's about being honest, and we know that actually to sit with dishonesty would hurt more than whatever
Mm.
violence like could possibly be thrown at us, right? And I also think it's because when I think about what I've gained from being gender non-conforming, is that I've gained better friendships and I've gained like better people around me. That I've learned more exciting things. I've learned better history. I've definitely learned better fashion. I can't imagine being just in the men's aisle now at the clothing store. Um, and so all these things I've gained, I think, come from like a searching of wanting something better and wanting something more, and to feel, and it makes me feel lucky to be gender non-conforming, or lucky to choose to lean into it rather than like to innately be it. But I think that I find it difficult, the narrative about finding home in our bodies that is sometimes spoken about. Um, not that oversimplifies. That's not what you were saying, but it is sometimes spoken about in like, transition narrative or trans narrative is like I transition to find home in my body. Um, because I don't want to only be happy when I finally find what may be that feeling. But also, I think it also makes it sound like only trans people or people that are out as trans have huge displacement within their body, as if once we
Mm.
find like our gender, we're going to then feel home, as if like this world then won't make us feel something bad about something else, as if like at every instance of being in this world, we're constantly trying, like people are constantly displacing us from our bodies. And so I don't know if I'm on this transition to find home in my body, but it's more to find honesty, and that I can't feel home when I can tell that I'm not being honest.
Mm.
And so I feel very honest in this like search that I'm still on about myself and my identity, rather than prior to this, growing up, I didn't feel in the wrong body. I felt dishonest. I felt like when people were asking me who I was or about me, everything felt dishonest because I could tell I was not being my full self. And so maybe it's about thinking about home as somewhere where you can feel honest and be honest. Um, I'm interested in what it felt like when you first left your hometown for the first time. We both left hometowns to go to a bigger city or go to a different place. I'm interested in what you learned about that moment and that shift.
Yeah, before going there, I appreciate that intervention around home as honesty. You're right. It's less about home as like a cessation of conflict and this like fantasy of like smoothness. Because, yes, like in some regards, I'm more present and palpable than I was when I was disassociated, but then in other, I'm exposed to more precarity than ever before, right? So it's not as much as I can sit here and be like, it's such a wonderful place to be. The world has made it not a wonderful place to be. But I think what feels different, you're right, is that sense of honesty. And I think home for me is so much about vulnerability. It's funny because people will say, become vulnerable. But I think that the becoming was actually like vulnerability for me is our natural orientation. And then the sort of rote denial of our heart, of our rage, of our sadness, of our complexity, that's the imposition. So when people are able to sort of move that curtain and actually be honest, it's so refreshing. It's like when people are saying their truth, I can feel it at an energetic and spiritual level. So yeah, when I was 18 years old, I left my hometown to go to university in California. And, I've always been quite precocious and always like had big dreams for myself. And so it's very me that I basically left with a bang. I was like, I'm never going to be in a closet again. So I was like, I'm not only going to be out as queer, I'm going to like be a queer activist, I'm going to be a queer artist, I'm going to do it all. And I had such a vigor and a zest for life. At this point in my performance tradition, it was like me with a megaphone writing poems to God, like out at a demonstration, yelling the poems to God through the megaphone. Um, feeling like I had something to say, and feeling like for the first time I had an audience, because I think growing up I didn't ever have anyone who cared, let alone understood. And there was such a thrill and such a possibility that I'm trying to return to in my art practice, because this was an era before cynicism. And I think cynicism is like a pesticide, and it just kind of is displaced over everything, and it makes everything feel so much less exciting and tangible and real. And cynicism is one of the biggest reasons that I have writer's block, because it's like, oh, this isn't going to land anyways, or there's no point. Sorry, what?
Your own cynicism or other people's, or is that not a different a line that feels clear?
I think both, because I think that the difference between writing now and writing then is, writing then I didn't really care what people thought because it just needed to come out. And then now I'm like, but people aren't going to understand. And I think what I'm trying to grapple with most is being okay with being misread, which is so hard for me because writing is my homemaking practice. It's like I'm inviting you into my home, and it's like I'm making you some soup. I'm saying soup because anyone who knows me knows that I can't like cook whatsoever. So like that was the easiest item of food I could think of. Like
And I'm
there's like a
ordering you,
can in that morning.
and I'm ordering you to take away.
Yeah, I'm ordering you takeout in my home, my makeshift home, and you're spitting out the food, and that feels like such a violation. But it's like you have to learn to be okay with that. And I think that's where I'm at in my practice now, which is new for me, is being like, okay, at first, the fantasy when I was a young artist was I'm going to speak my truth and then people will understand it. And then you realize you're going to speak your truth, and then a couple people will be like, yeah, but a lot of people don't want your truth and are going to try everything in their power to say you're a fool, and you still have to return to truth telling. And that is such a perverse psychological nervous system reaction, to be like, wait, I'm getting all this evidence that people say that I shouldn't be, and I'm still gonna go anyways.
Did as a, I'm grappling onto the bits that I, for me, I have. I also look back at younger writing of myself and go, "Wow, I would never say that now." And not because I don't agree with it, but because I would be so worried about what other people might say about me saying it. And I look at it, I'm like, wow, I was so honest. And it's that search again for honesty. Like, we go to the page to be honest, and then the cynicism comes in and it blocks us from being honest. And so when we feel sad, because again, this search, we can tell when we're not being honest with ourselves. And so I ask, was it easier to feel home when no one else was around, when the audience wasn't there? But when they weren't there, we were trying to speak to find it. So how do you sit with that contradiction that it didn't feel like home when no one was there, and you make the work and you make the art so that people will see us and listen to us, and then what happens when that act of seeing and gaze is exactly the same thing that then makes you not feel like home? How do you wrestle with that?
I think that what I'm realizing is, to be a writer is to be misunderstood. It's one and the same. And to continue to write anyways. And to be so much less concerned with the interpretation and how your work lives after you, because once you start living in that world, it makes it impossible to return to the writing. And I'm just really being honest with myself in that like the number one block of my creative process begins when I think, what are other people going to think? And not, what do I think? When I think, what do I think? I'm lucid as hell. Like it's just so clear. It's there. I can channel it. Um, yeah, the minute that you begin to prioritize other people's interpretation over your own zeitgeist, your own heart, it loses a soul, you know? And so what I'm actually realizing is it's just a very different phase of a career.
Mm.
And I think that's why it's really important to like learn from writers past of how they did it. And, my favorite collection of essays in the world is by James Baldwin, and he writes with such clarity about his loneliness that like he felt like the more honest he was, the less friends he had and the less people wanted him around. But then he said, I do it anyways because that's my job, is to reveal the unconscious. And I don't want to like sit here and romanticize isolation because it sucks. But I do want to say that I am committed to the idea of a writer writing the unconscious. And if you are writing the unconscious, of course people aren't going to say thank you for revealing my unconscious to me. Like, very few people are going to be like, thank you so much for writing the things that I am like deliberately trying to repress. Of course, that instant reaction is not going to be there. And that's not why we write. We don't write for instant gratification. I think we write for something else.
Mm. Yeah, and I guess that's why more and more the writing process for me feels deeply incompatible with the life that we have to live in lockdown, where the only gratification that we can have is from our phones or online, or these cycles which feels very instant and very built to like not have long form, or built to just pick up and take away, and built to kind of have all of these comments and these questions come at us. It feels deeply, deeply incompatible with my writing process, which is why like I'm like, like the last 4 days I've written more words than on my word count than I've written in like 4 weeks. And I was like, what's changed? Like, what's different? Oh, like I've been like less open to strangers online. I've been less open to other people's thoughts coming in and out, and I've watched less short YouTube clips and digested less like of these like bite-sized memes and TikToks and all of that, because that's all built off of like an instant feeling, which honesty never like really fits into as well, you know. Um, we're nearly going to be wrapping up. And so I wanted to imagine that we were going on tour tomorrow, and we had just been booked for like our own separate tours that we're going to meet somewhere in the middle. And you were allowed to bring, for some reason, you were only allowed to bring 3 things to make that tour feel as homely as possible. Are there 3 things that you would bring, or does that question not even fit into your definition of home?
One of my favorite things in the world is touring with a friend. So I would bring a friend first and foremost, just because you need someone to kind of decompress with afterwards, to like be at the airport at 5 in the morning with you and being like, I'm tired as well. And then secondly, um, since this is magic, I would bring a suitcase that allowed me to fit my entire wardrobe in it and still fit in the weight restrictions. Because, as you know, when I'm touring, it's like the shoes already taking up half the weight restriction, so I'm having to wear the entire look on the plane, darling. So, if I could just invent, if anyone's listening who wants to invent me like a magic gravity defying suitcase, that would be wonderful. And then I think third, I would take a book that when I opened was exactly what I needed to read at that moment. Because I feel reading is something that I've really started doing over the past few years very seriously. And the reason that I love it is that, like I said, these kind of daily quotidian practices of writing or reading allow me to build another world alongside this world to check out. And so it gives me that kind of sense of stability, even when there's so much flux when I'm reading something. it's like, oh, I'm just picking up where I left off, even if the situation around me is changing. What three things would you bring?
I would bring the cat that I'm getting on the best with at the moment, and but only with the ability that they could travel without like feeling stressed. Because cats on airplanes aren't great, so somehow the cat would feel like not stressed. Cats make me feel so at home. Um, I think I would also make sure that I could bring like a guide that everywhere would tell me like where's the place to eat past a certain time that will have everybody that you like want to see or people watch or meet or me when I'm on tour flirt. All of those kind of things that I would want to find on tour. And then third, clearly the best spa spots to go around because um, I'm about transitioning into this bougie tour lifestyle. If this time off has told me anything, when I come back to touring, the bougie is only going to be increased. So leaning into that would be my tour life too.
Of course. Thank you so much, Travis, for being in conversation with me. It feels so familiar to be deliriously tired and thinking with you. So let's just go so far as to say it's a kind of honesty that feels like home.
Thanks, babe. Lovely to chat.